Welcome back to the Renaissance Space podcast, a place for teachers, leaders, and anyone interested in education to hear a range of different voices discussing all manner of different topics associated with teaching and learning. My name is Margaret Allen, and I am your host, and I'm absolutely delighted this morning to be chatting to Matt Beaton. Thank you so much for joining us. Would you like to give us a little bit of an introduction? Who are you?
Good morning. So I'm Matt Beaton. I'm a children's author, writer, ex-teacher. Basically, I write a lot of things. I write for the Literacy Shed. I write my own books. And I've written a book for teachers, Write It, Level It, Teach It.
Fantastic. So you've written it. So does that mean it's available?
It comes out on July the 9th. It is released, as far as I'm aware, everywhere where you can buy books.
Amazing. How exciting. And an online version as well?
Yeah, there is a Kindle version. I imagine there will be other ebook versions in other ebook stores. But yeah, the Kindle version will be there as well.
And I presume you didn't just wake up one day and think, oh, I'll write that book. What sort of prompted the book? What started the journey of the writing of the book?
Well, the whole theory behind it is this idea of reading levels and the content that we put in front of children being the correct reading level for them. And as part of what I do for the Literacy Shed, writing reading comprehensions for them, it involved leveling text, looking at the reading level for them. And I kind of just realised while I was teaching, actually we don't, or certainly I didn't, and a lot of teachers that I know don't use this technology that's out there for free to kind of level the texts in our classroom, to kind of see actually, are they at a reading level that is going to challenge the children or that isn't too difficult for the children? And so that kind of sparked my interest in it, really, to keep researching and have a look. And then during the first lockdown, March, April kind of time, 2020, I ran a workshop to a couple of hundred teachers just to kind of gauge interest, see what interest was out there, see if it was just me that wasn't doing this, and everyone would kind of look at me like, no, obviously we're all doing that. But there were a lot of teachers that were kind of interested and realised, actually, you know what, there is some value to this, I think.
And in fact, we actually had a previous session, didn't we, where we talked exactly about ATOS, which is this analysing piece of software which allows things to be levelled, and with what you consider to be pretty strong accuracy. Yeah,
it is, and it takes into account so many different things. Like it looks at the sentence structure, the sentence length, the word choice, all of those kind of things. And I go into a lot more detail about that in the book. But it kind of it just gives you that confidence that you know that what you've actually written is going to be within that kind of reading level for those children. Obviously, writing children's books, I use those kind of systems a lot to make sure, actually, you know what, the books that I'm writing are at an appropriate level. It's quite easy sometimes, especially when you're a teacher, when you're writing, to get carried away with so much vocabulary, so much kind of grammar and all of these things that before you know it, you're putting a year 7 or 8 text in front of a year 3 child and wondering why they're struggling to access it.
So it's quite timely that we've just expected 10 and 11-year-olds to read some text, which they're allowed to keep, to refer back to when they answer the questions. And of course, we're talking about SATs, which have not been around for the last 2 years. So there's probably all sorts of issues there as well. But it's obviously a timely moment.
Yeah, I mean, my oldest daughter's in year 6, so she's just gone through it as well, which was interesting to see from a parent's point of view. But as part of the research for the book, I've looked at all the last, I don't know what, so 2016, so what's that, last 5 SATs maybe, the last 5 or 6 SATs for the Key Stage 2, and the reading level has always been high. It's always been kind of averaging out at top end of year 6, year 7. Some of them, if anyone remembers the Pandas text, I think was closer to year 10. But this year's is actually slightly lower. So this year's averaged kind of upper year 5, middle year 6. But the language within it was far more contextual. So it was quite tricky language. I know there was a lot of uproar online because it was quite, for want of a better term, middle class language within the text, rather than a more tricky reading age. So it was interesting to analyse this year's. Obviously, I haven't had a look at the Key Stage 1 SATs this year yet because They haven't been released to the public
No.
yet.
And technical vocabulary, of course, is key in any type of reading and writing with children, and acquiring that vocabulary, being exposed to that vocabulary, understanding it, definitions, synonyms, and all of that good stuff.
Yeah, and that's important, because we can never kind of give a 100% accurate reading level for every child, because so much of it is going to be context. If you've got a text about, talk about it in the book, if you've got a text about dinosaurs, for instance, there is a lot of language in there, paleontology, coprolite, all of this kind of language that a child who has been fascinated with dinosaurs since they were 2 or 3 years old will know that language because they've been exposed to it.
Yes.
But somebody who never has won't know that language. So their reading access for that text will be different. So you can never fully take into account those kind of things. And that's not the point, really. It's just to give you that idea. And that's what the ATOS system does so well, is it gives you that baseline idea of, okay, this is kind of where it's going to be.
And actually, Renaissance uses ATOS to give this level, which is seen to be an appropriate level for children to consider reading 60% of the time. That's basically the premise upon which it's based. And good old ZPD, let's throw in an acronym. It's about time, really, isn't it?
Yeah, the zone of proximal development, which again is key to learning, really. It's that zone where if it's too easy, they're going to be bored. They're going to switch off. They're not going to challenge themselves. If it's too hard, the same thing, you will just switch off. As an adult, if something is too difficult to understand, you just switch off and you scroll past, or you move on. If something's too boring, too easy. So that, what I like about the ATOS system is it doesn't say, oh, this text is appropriate for a year 5 child. What it gives you is a breakdown by percentages. So it will say, 20, this fits within the top 25 centile of year 5, or this will fit within the top 50th centile. So, so you've got that range of, it's not saying this is a silver bullet, this is one child that will access this. It is that range, which is what we all know as teachers, is how children are. And then with that ZPD, with the zone of proximal development, that's going to be broad. Yes. Across your class, you're going to have children at different levels, accessing things at slightly different levels. And there is a range. It's not just a specific exact text. So the book and the ATOS system isn't about taking away that autonomy from teachers and saying it has to be done this one way. It's about showing you, actually, this is the region. This is an idea. Look at this and bear it in mind amongst everything else that you kind of do as a brilliant teacher, and just use that to help.
Yeah, and I think that's really important. And also, we don't want to compartmentalize children, and reading is such a tough one on so many levels. Where do you start? What do they bring with them to the journey of reading when they even first come into school? And an understanding, and cultural capital is something that's brandished about. I prefer to talk about literacy capital in a way, because to your point, if you've been to a zoo, then you know what an elephant looks like, and actually reading a book on elephants then gives you the opportunity to really bring that alive in your own mind, which must help.
And even just your house, if you live on a farm in the middle of a kind of, well, the opposite of it, I can't remember the word. But if you live on a farm, you might not know what it's like to hear the sounds of a city at night. If you live in the city and your school has no green space and it's just it's got playgrounds or concrete, you might not be able to contextually understand a story about an adventure on a farm or in the woods. So it's all of that life capital comes into reading and comes into comprehension rather than just decoding words.
Yes. And also, of course, what we sometimes forget, and I certainly think people who aren't in education forget, is that what goes hand in hand with reading is writing. Because if children aren't able to read, then they're not going to be able to write. But actually, if they aren't speaking effectively or have language that they can use, how can you expect them to articulate that with a pen in their hand, or even a keyboard if we want to go down that route?
Yeah, completely. I mean, I run writing workshops in schools called Fighting Writing workshops, which are all about using the miniatures, like Games Workshop miniatures, those kind of things, models. And the whole point of that is about talking. So we act out the battles, we play these little adventures with the figures, and all the children are doing throughout that is just talking the language to each other. And the message to them all the way through is talking is writing. If you can talk, you can write. If you can't talk, you can't write. So it's that's the whole point behind that. And, you know, if you, going back to this idea of the reading levels with the writing, if you're putting as a teacher a text in front of a child that is too hard, and then you're asking them to innovate or to change or to create their own version, if they can't understand the original text, they're not going to be able to innovate. All you're going to get is swapping the odd word. You're not going to get that sentence level innovation that you're looking for, because they haven't understood the first concept. They haven't understood the first text. So if, like you said, if they can't access the reading, they're going to struggle with the writing. And if they can't access the talking, they're going to struggle with the writing. And it's that trifecta, isn't it? They all link into one another. They're all as important as each other.
Completely. And I think one of the things that I've begun to realise very clearly from talking to different people is how the different subject areas, certainly at secondary, start to disassociate themselves almost from the whole language acquisition. And I don't mean that across the board before people start shouting and screaming. You know, reading and writing is not the domain of the English department, because if you're sitting a science paper or a history paper, you need to have the skills to access that information.
You do, and it's very interesting. I obviously go into a lot of schools doing these writing workshops, and I've been into quite a few secondary schools recently that are actually buying into now the accelerated reader scheme, because they're realizing, actually, you know what, that reading is dropping away. But actually, I'm going to get a lot of hate mail from this, but I'm actually one of the few, I think, teachers and ex-teachers that doesn't necessarily disagree with all of the grammar that they have to learn and things like the fronted adverbials and things like that. And I know that's a very unpopular position, but actually, I strongly believe our job as teachers is to teach the English language. It's not to teach authors. They're not going to go on to be authors. They might go on to be science writers or architects or they
Yes.
need all of that structural
non-fiction.
Yeah, non-fiction is a thing. We may not always like to admit that, but non-fiction is a thing.
Yeah.
And so it's about more than just writing creatively and about more than just the imagination, which is obviously vital. It's obviously important, and they need to be exposed to all of this amazing vocabulary. But actually, there is more to it as well. And I think, like you say, at high school, tying in all of those things, science, history, RE, whatever, is so important with the English, and keeping those standards and keeping that kind of ethos of actually it matters is really important.
Yes, and it obviously always at the moment, I hear, and I'm sure you do too, is this sort of challenge between the paper and the screen, or the book and the screen. And I'm a real advocate of real books. I understand that digital books work, and there's all sorts of advantages around digital reading, sharing, whole class guided reading, all of that good stuff works much better on a big screen if you're trying to share it with everybody. But the concept of children sitting with a book, and the concept of children, once they're reading, still sitting with an adult with a book,
yeah,
I think is often underestimated, because parents perhaps don't realise.
I think so. And I think parents are busier now as well, aren't they? And it's easy for that to drop. I mean, I'm not always great at reading with my children and sitting there reading them. They always see me reading, but sitting there and reading with them is something that I need to get better at. And I think, like you say, with the digital device, I think we go back to that idea of a silver bullet, doesn't it? There is no catch-all that's going to fix everything. There needs to be paper books. Digital books have their purpose. Like you say, sharing class sets. Sometimes if you're going on holiday, it's easier to take a Kindle than taking 30 paperbacks with you. There are purposes, but also there are purposes and places for hard physical copies of books. And it's just finding that balance, really,
Yes.
I think. And I always used to push things like comic books and graphic novels, because I think it's reading. It's accessing that passion for reading, I suppose, that love of it. If I have parents come in and say, oh, they'll only read comics, they're not reading big, massive novels, it's fine.
Yes.
They're reading. I hated reading at primary school, absolutely hated reading. And it wasn't until my dad gave me a graphic novel copy of The Hobbit that I realized, oh, okay, no, I like reading. I just don't like reading the stuff I had to read at primary school. So, sometimes it's just finding your book. And I think that sometimes gets lost.
That element of free choice has to be always at the heart. And I know you mentioned accelerated reader. People talk about, children being shoehorned into books they have to read. Please, if you think that, talk to us, because it's not about that. They are given this zone and they can choose from that zone level. It's not to say they can't read anything else. What I think all teachers are striving for are children to be wanting to open a book and enjoy it and become passionate about reading.
And I think
whatever works.
And I think you won't get that by forcing them into certain sections. I think ironically is in Shawshank Redemption, it kind of says, if you love something, you have to set it free, kind of thing. I think it's the same with reading. If you want them to love reading, you kind of almost have to step back and, okay, go and read whatever you want, and we'll see where, there's a difference, I think, between reading to learn how to read and then reading because you fancy reading something. Yes. And that's okay. My daughter's school have two books. They have a book that they've chosen that's completely unbanded, talking in kind of EYFS here, it's completely unbanded. And then they have a book that is at the appropriate band level for them to help them learn how to read. And I think that's a great way of approaching it.
Yeah, completely. So, great way of approaching it. How are you going to be approaching the next? You've obviously got some time now. If you've got this book done, or so. What are your plans, Matt? What's the future hold for you?
Well, I've got more children's books that I'm writing. I've got a new series of choose your own kind of branching narratives coming out. Pick Your Path Adventures, that's coming out in July. I'll be pushing this, the Right at Level Teacher. I'm hoping to get, now we can finally get back into schools. They're starting to take off again, the workshops. Nice. I'm down in Bognor Regis tomorrow as we record this. I'll have been by the time this is released. Starting to get back into schools, which is good. Hoping to go into some schools and do some teacher training based on the book as well. And hopefully looking at some different, I've kind of got an idea for another teaching book based on branching narratives, but I need to speak to some people about it and see kind of if there's any interest.
Well, that sounds very exciting and fascinating. I'm looking forward to getting a copy of the book and reading it for myself. I'm also looking forward to seeing how people respond to it, because it is a bit of a new venture. We're obviously thrilled. Well, we're thrilled that ATOS has had such an impact or helped shape some of the elements. I've often referred to ATOS as our best kept secret. Thank you for your enthusiasm and your time, and good luck.
Thank you. And don't forget, buy the book when it comes out. You can pre-order. You can go and pre-order now as well. Don't have to wait till July the 9th.
Well, you heard it here.
Thank you.
Thank you. If you've enjoyed this episode, please take a moment to rate and review us wherever you get your podcasts. And don't forget that you can catch up on all previous episodes at www.renlearn.co.uk/podcast. Thank you for listening. If you enjoyed this episode of the Renaissance Space podcast, please check out the Education Joining the Dots podcast from our colleagues at GL Assessment. Thank you.